Okay, so a couple years ago, Nathan spent like a year making this really cool compositing tool, a Blender add-on called Compify. You guys paid for it through the Patreon without even knowing it, and I've never released it. So consider this kind of an alpha release. It should all work as long as you're not trying to do anything too fancy, but if you do, you might start encountering little secret challenges, a lot of which just has to do with the fact that Blender's API has limits on what it will let you control inside of Blender via an add-on. Although, because Nathan knows people, there was a change in the official Blender code that allows Compify to work. So, he's not impressed by that, but I think it's pretty cool. Alright, so let me show you. I've done what I usually do. I projected my footage onto this low-res geometry like this. And what's cool about this is the footage will actually interact a little bit with the CG stuff. Like if we look underneath this plane, you can see it's casting a little bit of green light up here onto the bottom of this platform here. But of course, the problem is that if this platform were actually here, there wouldn't be as much light underneath the platform to bounce back up onto the underside of it. And you could try to combine it with a shadow catcher pass, but a shadow catcher doesn't play nice with an emissive material. Also, shadow catchers just aren't that physically accurate. Like, they don't work well for interior spaces, or you can see here we've got like a red shadow and a blue shadow. We check shadow catcher, and it just turns it all into a grayscale image. So for years, I kind of figured, okay, you can have the footage affect the CG object, you can have the CG object affect the footage via a shadow catcher, but you can't do both at the same time. Until one day I go up into Nathan's office and he's sitting there like in a bathrobe looking real sleepy, and he goes, I had this idea last night at 2 a.m. and I wanted to try it out. Have you ever delit footage? And I'm like, no. Wait a second, because the short version is delighting is where you calculate all of the light affecting an object and divide those values out from the object, basically neutralizing the lighting affecting the object and leaving you with a neutral, target effectively. Maybe we'll get into it later. You don't have to understand it, but he tried it out, and look at this. Oh my goodness, look at this. Everything's affecting everything. Above this, here, if we change the color of the platform to like red, you can see it's actually casting that red light up above. It all just works physically. Here, let's see. I'm going to create a platform over the top here. Gonna subdivide it a few times. Going to inset and extrude. Let's give it like a little roof here. Maybe add like a little house or something with a little window right here. And it's a little dark inside, so here, let's add a little skylight on top. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's nice. Here, let's add a door. And you could just play with it, and everything just kind of gets along. Look at that. That's so crazy. This is the dream right here. Or let's add a big pipe here. We'll kind of have it coming out of the wall like this. Here we can inset and extrude. And actually here, let's duplicate this, separate it out into its own object, and use it as a boolean with the footage. And look at that, we can just cut holes into stuff. We can punch it out a little bit, and everything just plays nice, and it all just works. Except when it doesn't, which is, again, the reason like I've held off on releasing this, because it's just, there's a lot that can go wrong, but it's so useful when it works. For doing shots I can't think of doing any other way. Like, interior spaces are really hard to composite in because the light coming in from the window would be blocked by the CG object, which means it couldn't light back onto the thing. And so I wanted to add a door here, and look at this. You can just do it. You can just put stuff where you want to put the stuff. Here, let's do the monkey. That works so good. How would you even do this otherwise? I don't even know. And here it's as easy as just kind of extruding a bunch of cubes. Or I threw a bunch of frames from some aerial footage through like a photo scan program, and I was able to get a 3D model and just project it back onto that. But now I can stick stuff kind of just wherever I want, which lets me get interaction that would otherwise just be really tricky, And I'm not going to get into it today, but the ideal workflow would be actually using an HDRI of the same space that you grab at the location so that everything can play really nice and it's canceling out the actual light from the actual space. But you can also just eyeball it. Cool. Okay, so now that I kind of pitched it, let's get into how you actually use it, because there's a lot going on, and Nathan worked really hard to make the tool handle most of it, but there's still a little bit you got to do, and a few little problems you might run into. So let's try to cover all of that. Let's go back to our other scene here. I've already tracked everything. I've got a bunch of tracking tutorials out there. I won't go into that again in this one, but let's create a camera with those same settings. We'll just go through the process of setting up this whole deal. 18.25. Let's apply our tracking solve to it with this right here and turn on our motion trackers. You can see we've got our corner here. Here, let's turn down the scale of those trackers a little bit. I'm going to line it all up so everything's kind of square. So we can see we've got our wall straight right here. We've got kind of the slope of the ground down below it. Let's line it up with a cube and just put the cube here so it matches these all of these points. Maybe extrude it out a little bit. And already I run into the first pitfall because the normals are very important. Every face has a kind of inherent orientation, which you can see if you go into face orientation. Blue is the outside, red is the inside, which means when we go to bake the lighting, it would calculate for out here instead of in here. And you might think that's like a stupid mistake, but I do that one all the time. So here, let's select everything and hit Shift N. And down here, I'm going to check inside, which means we got the blue, which is what we want. Here we can turn our face orientation overlay back off. I'm going to add a little bit more geometry here with Control R. And then I'm going to turn on proportional editing and just move these so that they're kind of half intersecting all of these little tracking points, because that means the geometry will kind of be lined up with the ground. I'm also going to go back and get rid of everything that's outside the camera view because we're going to be baking everything onto a texture. I don't want to waste a lot of texture on stuff that isn't even going to be on camera. So delete that. Here, we can move this out like this. It doesn't matter too much. It's just a thing I like to do. Or you can actually dump the images from the image sequence into like reality capture or Metashape or Polycam or something, get a photo scan out of it and project the footage onto the photo scan, which can sometimes introduce certain problems, but a lot of times it's really good for getting like really complex integrations and stuff. I always thought it'd be fun to use this method to like flood the interior of a house or something like that. Yeah. And okay, we're ready. After you've installed the add-on, which will be here on the download page, just go Code, Download Zip, and then under Preferences, you know, you go to Add-ons, Install, and just load in the zip file. But then you're ready to go. So if we go under the Scene tab here, you can see Compify is down here, and all we got to do is fill in this information right here. So let's load in our footage. And this is kind of the second pitfall, because if you're just loading in a video clip, everything will work great. But if you're loading in an image sequence, which is a thing I like to do, the Blender API doesn't let you say how many images are being used from the image sequence. So it's only going to use the first frame. We'll have to fix that later. So just keep that in mind. Again, if you're just loading in a video clip, don't even worry about it. Next, all right, what's the camera? Let's use the eyedropper. We'll just select the border here. This is the camera. Great. The footage geometry, they want that in a collection, so let's just create that collection, and we just have to put this into that footage geometry. Next is footage lights, and in this collection you put all the lights you want neutralized from the footage. So like let's add a sunlight. You don't have to put anything in there at all actually, and it'll just use the environment light, but let's add this sunlight. Let's turn up the angle to kind of simulate the overcast sky a little bit. So now, because this is in the footage lights folder, it will not affect the footage. It's going to be canceled out, and that'll all make sense in a second. So let's go back to scene here. Let's click prep scene. And prep scene does a lot. Here, if we go into the UV editor, you can see it's unwrapped our material here. And if we go under the shader editor, you can see it's set up all of these different node groups here that is doing a whole bunch of different fancy stuff. Here, I'm going to line up these with kind of this edge right here just to make me feel a little better. And now I think we're ready. Here, let's click. Well, first let's save. And now let's click Bake Footage Lighting. And it calculates all the lighting affecting it on this neutral white material. And it's done. Here, if we put our monkey in there, you can see it's all working as it's supposed to. Of course, while it's working, while this is neutralizing the lighting affecting it, we didn't really match the lighting up to the footage particularly well. I just threw in this sunlight, and it's all working, but now the question is, how much effort do we want to put into actually making this lighting match the footage? So in this case, I could just like turn up the angle of the sunlight a little bit and like maybe turn the strength, and turn up the brightness of the world maybe a tad. And at any time, we can just go back and rebake it like this. Or if I were really on top of things, I would use my 360 camera and actually just gotten a lighting sample at this exact location, which I didn't do, but I do have similar ones. So let's go into the world settings of the shader editor. I'm going to hit Control-T, load in an HDRI. I got all these the other day down by the waterfront. Here, let's load one in. By default, it's going to be very bright. Let's try 0.05 and maybe rotate it a little bit. This light's coming in from that side. And I think it's a little bit too blue, so I'm going to throw in a mix color node here and divide out a little bit of blue. Cool, and now we can just rebake it again. It'll cancel out that new HDRI. And there we go. That feels a little bit more realistic. Or instead of the monkey, let's put in this this guitar. Cool. Or let's build like a fort. There we go. Now we have a fort for the guitar to live in, made of his brethren. So you basically get the idea. And if I wanted to, I could add in a lot more geometry like this. Like if I wanted to add in a boulder here. Here, let's bevel that a little bit. Stick it in the ground. But this new geometry hasn't been UV unwrapped, and so it's just going to be overlapping everything else, which is going to be a mess. So we can just click Prep Scene again. And now it'll be part of the unwrap, and we can just bake it at any time. And now our rock is part of the bake too. Cool. Same thing with down here. I accidentally got rid of a little bit too much geometry, so let's slide some of these back out, and we can just prep and rebake again. Let's add a sphere just because it's fun to add spheres, I guess. Cool. If a scene's really complex, sometimes I'll turn up the margins here to like 8 and like, 4,000. Also for the bake settings, it uses whatever's in the render tab, so I might just turn this down to like 200. Don't need to go too crazy here. Also, a lot of times I'm working on a scene that goes way off into the distance, but I don't need to bake the entire environment because like a lot of times they'll go literally to the horizon. So I'll just do the part I actually want to worry about, and then I will create a little backdrop here in the background. And here, let's go into the shader editor, give that background a new material, delete this. Let's load in our footage here, texture, image texture, open. There we go. Drag that into the surface. And for projecting, we can just use a node that Compify makes called Camera Project. And this lets you project the footage from the camera's point of view, assuming you have the right aspect ratio in here. So let's do 1920 divided by 1080. There we go. Although this should be lining up perfectly. Which is because, you remember earlier when I said when you load in the footage in Compify, it doesn't let you say how many frames there are. So what we have to do is go into the shader editor and add them over here if you have an image sequence. And now everything lines up perfect. In here, I might bring this down to kind of match up with the top of this right here. And oh yeah, you can also add light too. As long as the light isn't in the footage lights collection, it won't be canceled out, and you can just do whatever you want. So here, let's get like some red light here, and maybe some blue light and some green light down here in the shed. Here, we'll put this scan of Nathan in here too, playing the guitar. So that, I think, is going to be version 1 of the video, kind of the alpha release. Because if you go into the material settings, you can see there's lots of other options here. I'm just not going to get into all of them right now. Like the feathered square here, say we have a chrome sphere in our scene, you can see the edge of the geometry in it. And so this lets you feather how that looks in just the reflections, in the indirect light bounces. So you can imagine if we had an HDRI perfectly lined up with all of the geometry, this would blend from this to the actual HDRI environment pretty seamlessly. It's pretty cool. And oh yeah, the last button here, render animation with Compify integration. So when you click bake footage lighting, you're just baking whatever frame is currently up. And sometimes that works okay. Like this is the widest view, and we just kind of like get closer so that one bake works for everything. But let's say the camera were to look to the left, or you walk around the corner of a building, or there's changing light across the footage, like strobe lights or something. You might want a separate bake for every single frame. And so if you click this, it'll render your animation the same as going up here, except it will bake an individual D-light for every single frame, which is really handy. Compify also includes the Camera Project node group creator under the camera settings. You click that, and it'll create a node group you can plug in as the vector into your footage. Oh, and let's put in the aspect ratio 1920 divided by 1080. And that's just an easy way of projecting the footage from the camera's point of view. We already released this one, so if you already have that installed, uninstall that. Otherwise, it'll just appear twice. And this is to replace Blender's default UV project modifier, which is just always all zigzaggy unless if you really add a lot of geometry to straighten everything out, which is kind of annoying. Oh, a crash Blender. And Compify also comes with a line camera track, which is another little utility I'll make a whole video about. But basically, it lets you, as long as you can specify the location of 3 points on 2 different objects, it'll align them. And I use it a lot for like lining up footage with a photo scan. I can use a tracking marker from my motion track and specify that same point on the photo scan and snap everything together all nice. Although the reason it's called Align Camera Track is it was specifically designed to let you line up different cameras in the same digital extension. Like if you're shooting from multiple angles and wanted to line up a different new shot with a digital extension you already had going, as long as you could specify like 3 different tracked points across the 2 shots, you could just line them all up so it would all work nice. But we'll get into that later. And you know what? I'm recording this on a different day. I feel a little bit more mentally sharper, so I think I can actually explain to you what it's doing mathematically. Yeah, like I was saying, if you project the footage onto the geometry with an emissive shader, and the emissive shader has a value of 1, this is just what the raw footage looks like. But if we put a little monkey down there, the footage will light the monkey, but there's no way to get a shadow, and it's still lighting the monkey as if the monkey wasn't there, with like the bounce light coming up from below. There's no contact shadow. And I've also set up a light here to kind of shine on the monkey to match the footage lighting. But if we change the shader from emission to diffuse, you can see the monkey now has all of those great interactions, but the footage is now double lit because whatever lighting you have set up to light the CG object is also affecting the diffuse footage. So the question is, how could you use a diffuse material while still having it look the same as an emission shader with a value of 1? Which is where baking comes in. Baking lets you calculate all the light currently hitting an object and to save that as a file. Here, let me show you. If we click Prep Scene, it's going to automatically unwrap this cube here. Here you can see the faces. And then if we click Bake Footage, it's going to calculate, it's basically just going to render all of the lighting and save that over here. You can see that all of the shadows that were previously over here have been saved into the bake, and Compify is using this bake to cancel those same shadows out of the original object. And even though this looks flat, it's still a diffuse material. Here, if we put our monkey in there, you can see it still has like the shadows and the sun and everything on it. If we make our monkey be like red, it's still going to bleed back onto the object. How does it do that? Literally all it has to do, and again, you don't have to actually understand this, I just think it's cool, is divide the values of the bake by the video texture that you want. So like, let's say this light has a value of 4. So here's 4, it divides that value by 4, which equals 1. Or let's say in the back, in the dark corner here, where not much light is hitting. Let's say it's really dark and only has a value of 0.1. 0.1 divided by 0.1 is the same as multiplying it by 10, which equals 1. So no matter what you do, it's always going to equal 1, which means it looks exactly the same as if we just plugged it into an emissive shader instead. Cool. So the actual process of delighting couldn't be easier, but setting up the materials so that you can actually do that original bake to begin with all the indirect lighting and everything working nicely, was a big pain in the butt. So that is effectively what Compify does. It automatically sets up all this stuff so you don't have to do it by hand. It just tries to make it as painless as possible. So again, you guys are kind of the beta testers. Let us know what works. No promises that we can get everything working all the time, but it's a cool tool, and I want to see what people are able to do with it. Thank you so much, Nathan, for pouring your heart and soul into trying to make this thing work. Sorry it took me so long to put it out there, but yeah, all right, here we go.